choshech, darkness, one of the plagues that afflicted the Egyptians and ultimately persuaded the Egyptian empire to allow the Jewish people to leave Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt. The Torah describes this darkness as v'yamesh choshech. V'yamesh comes from the word mamashut, lihishtamesh or lishamesh, to feel the darkness. This darkness was suffocating. It enveloped the Egyptians. As Rashi says, choshech shel laila ya'amish v'yachshich od. It would only increase and ultimately incapacitate the Egyptians. They could not move, they could not breathe, they could not function. Unfortunately, this type of darkness is not something that only the Egyptians, the Mitzrim, experienced, but this type of darkness is something that plagues our generation as well. With regards to mental illness, people who experience anxiety, depression, the inability to deal with this world, these people too find themselves enveloped by a darkness, a lack of understanding from the people around them, perhaps a lack of sympathy or empathy from the people who are supposed to understand them. And unfortunately, over just the last few weeks, there are a number of incidents of youngsters who lost their lives through suicide. One of them, unfortunately, as many of you know, our daughter גילה. גילה herself experienced the trauma of anxiety, depression, the inability to really comprehend or understand what this world wanted from her and how exactly she would navigate her way through this world to succeed. That was very painful for her. And many times she described her predicament as finding herself enveloped by darkness, the inability for her to find light and to navigate her way to a successful well-being. Mental illness is alive and well, unfortunately, amongst us. And it's important for us to recognize that it is no longer something that afflicts only those on the periphery or those who are strange. No, mental illness affects many of us and many of our youngsters and adults who live amongst us, within our communities, within our congregations, within our immediate spheres. We might not necessarily recognize that they have it, but it is a disease that exists within nonetheless. This week in the United Kingdom, the organization JAMI, J-A-M-I, is running a mental health awareness Shabbat throughout the United Kingdom. This is a spearheaded effort that I think is to be commended and should be actually mimicked and also incorporated in communities throughout the world. All Jewish communities should have mental awareness Shabbat and recognize that indeed there are many people, youngsters, who suffer from anxiety, depression, pain that they are experiencing that they do not necessarily know how to grapple with and how to deal with. One of the most important features in terms of dealing with mental health, and it's important for you to recognize, obviously I know, I am not a professional and I do not propose to have solutions to these particular problems by any stretch of the imagination, but I will say this. It is important for us to rid ourselves of the stigma and to realize that mental illness is an illness that exists and that infects many, many people just like any other physical ailment that might exist. And the first thing to do to deal with it is to remove the stigma, to recognize its existence and its effectiveness and its unfortunate consequences that it can have. The moment that we learn to realize and recognize this impact and to talk openly in dialogue and discuss the issue is the moment that we begin to realize that it is solvable, that we can deal with it, and that people can be helped and ultimately can make a normal lives for themselves and be a part and ultimately demonstrate to the world the wonderful talents and the wonderful personalities that they have within. Hopefully, if we realize and recognize its existence, and we investigate and discuss, we can also find those solutions which will help us realize and actualize what it actually says in this week's parsha with regards to all of the Jewish people. Ulechol b'nei Yisrael haya or b'moshvotam. Wherever the Jewish people were, wherever they found themselves, indeed, there was light upon the place where they found or when they lived. Let us hope that we see that day as well. Shabbat Shalom.